There's a lot of adults that suspiciously left with the children. Just saying, I'm on to you. I'm on to you. I want to talk a little bit today about a word that we overuse, and dare I say, use improperly. That's right, you're going to get a grammar lesson this morning, which I know is what you're here for. That word is unbelievable. Now, we use that word, unbelievable, to describe several different things. For example, when you're watching sports, you might see an unbelievable play. When you're maybe out in nature, you might see something that is unbelievably beautiful or majestic. The amount of snow in Tahoe right now is unbelievable. And there's other things we would describe as unbelievable too, like animal videos. I know some of you like to watch animal videos. I am personally addicted to husky videos because I have a husky, and it's nice to know that my dog isn't the only crazy one. But there are unbelievable animal videos. Like Linda was telling me she watched one this last week about a lion befriending a baby deer. That, my friends, is unbelievable. That a lion... I also saw one myself this last week where like a regular house cat was chasing away a tiger. Like a real tiger. That is also unbelievable. Sometimes we describe food as being unbelievable as we're eating it. This food is unbelievably good. Something can be unbelievably funny, which is kind of a funny comment to make, that something is unbelievably funny. And the irony, of course, is that some of these things that we call unbelievable, we are actually experiencing in real time. They're happening right in front of us, and we call these things unbelievable. And probably what we should say is this thing we are experiencing or seeing or hearing or eating, whatever it is, we probably should say that this is extraordinary. It is incredible. It is wonderful. But instead, we use the word unbelievable. Now, extraordinary is kind of an interesting word as well. I don't know if you've ever thought about that word. If something is extraordinary, how can it be exceptional when the word literally says it is extraordinary? Doesn't that mean it would be the max level of ordinary that it could get? Just want to throw that out there. But here's the definition of unbelievable. Something that is unbelievable is not to be believed and unlikely to be true. Therefore, when we say that this food we're eating is unbelievably good, we are actually insulting the food and the cook. We are. I cannot believe this food is so good, therefore it must be bad. That is what we are saying when we say that word. But whatever it is, we know what we're saying. Well, it's going past our normal capacity to absorb or understand, that there is an element of something that is literally unbelievable that pushes us past maybe our experience or our normal ability to believe. It's too crazy. It's too outlandish. It's too impossible. I want you to know that the story of the resurrection of Jesus is truly an unbelievable story. It is. And I'll never forget the first time, as an adult, this happened actually not too long ago, where a friend who is not a churchgoer, is not a Christian, doesn't believe, we were talking about my job and what I do, and this person said, I want to ask you a question. And I said, okay, ask away. Do you actually believe that Jesus rose from the dead? And I said, yeah, I do. And he said, huh. And then we moved on to another topic. Which was good. That was about all I could say about that, is yes, I believe this is true. Let's get to the story. It's difficult for to find someone, I should say, that doesn't know something about the Jesus story, that doesn't have an idea about who Jesus is, because Jesus is a part of our culture and our world. Now, granted, people may not know the story in full, but they have heard the basics, that we say, Jesus is the Son of God, that he taught and performed miracles, that he was crucified, and that he was resurrected. Now, though people might have heard these things about Jesus, they may believe some of it or think that some of it is true, but they may not believe other big parts of it. For example, most people don't have a problem saying that Jesus lived. They don't have a problem saying that Jesus was a wonderful teacher. They don't have a problem even saying that the morality that Jesus gave to his followers and that those who listened was extraordinary. But when you get into that other stuff, the Son of God part, the resurrection part, that's when things get a little shaky for people. Jesus did things that had never been seen before, long before the gospel claims he was resurrected. And Jesus was not just killed, he was killed in the most cruel and public way possible. So now to the resurrection story from Luke 24, verses 1 through 12. On the first day of the week, very early in the morning, the women took the spices they had prepared and went to the tomb. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they entered, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. While they were wondering about this, suddenly 2 men in clothes that gleamed like lightning stood before them. In their fright, the women bowed down with their faces to the ground. But the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here. He is risen. Remember how we told you while he was still with you in Galilee, the Son of Man must be delivered over to the hands of sinners, be crucified, and on the 3rd day be raised again." Then they remembered his words. When they came back from the tomb, they told all these things to 11 and to all the others. It was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the others with them who told this to the apostles. But they did not believe the women, because their words seemed to them like nonsense. Peter, however, got up and ran to the tomb. Bending over, he saw the strips of linen lying by themselves, and he went away wondering to himself what had happened. There's something I want us to get out on the table right away here today, before we go any further. And that is, again, that the resurrection of Jesus is an unbelievable story. It involves death, angels, an empty tomb, several witnesses to the event. It leads to encounters, an experience and sightings of Jesus as the risen Lord. It is unbelievable, this story. And you don't do yourself or anyone else any favors by pretending that the resurrection of Jesus is not unbelievable, that, it's just God. The resurrection story is unbelievable, and I want you to know that it must be. It must be unbelievable. Our mind does funny things when we hear unbelievable stories. And when we hear something that is really hard to believe, we as people, and this is common to everyone, we try to explain how the unbelievable thing happened. Right? This is kind of a true tendency with everyone. So for example, in 2012, Lauren Kornacki, a 22-year-old woman in Glen Allen, Virginia, lifted a BMW 525i off of her father when the car toppled from a jack. 7 years earlier, a man named Tom Boyle lifted a Chevy Camaro freeing a trapped cyclist in Tucson, Arizona. Now, have any of you tried to lift a car before? No? No. Okay. Why? It's too heavy, and you can't do it, right? I mean, just under normal circumstances, we can't do it. And yet, we have stories of people doing this unbelievable thing. But Google lifting a car off someone, and the first 5 to 10 hits are all about how you actually can lift a car off of someone. Right? This is our tendency. If something is extraordinary, if something is unbelievable, we have to somehow make it believable and remove the mystery or the wonder from it. We try to strip it of the things that we don't understand, of the things that are not normal to our lives so that we can explain why it happened. And why do we do that? Because it makes us feel better. It makes us feel better to have an answer. It makes us feel better to say, oh, this is how that happened. Now, in a lot of ways, this tendency to explain is amplified when those who don't believe in God are faced with events like the resurrection, because they attempt to put death and resurrection into terms that they understand. After all, this is real life, isn't it? And there's an important step that many people, when they read biblical accounts of miracles and wonders, they want to take this step of explaining how this miraculous event, this unbelievable event, is actually not so miraculous. And maybe you've heard some of these throughout your life. Things like the Red Sea could have been parted by the wind. Or when Jesus was walking on water, he was probably on like this little sand dune or walking across rocks that people couldn't see, and it looked like he was walking on water. And sometimes it seems like in these discussions that any explanation will do. This is our tendency. In a world and a time when we have so much knowledge at our fingertips, these stories that defy what we know and have seen and have experienced are scary to us. And before you shake your head and make a judgment about this behavior in others, I want to remind you that these stories, and especially the resurrection story, describe events that are unbelievable. They challenge the world that we know. And here's why the resurrection provides such a problem. Jesus was good and dead, okay? He was put into a tomb. There were many witnesses to his death. The tomb was sealed with his body inside. We even know who the tomb belonged to. And there also seems to be no debate about whether the tomb was empty or not. People can accept that the tomb is empty. These details, though, are trivial in the great scheme of things, and there's really no need to argue about them. They will concede those points to us. They are perfectly acceptable. They're acceptable until you claim that that dead person rose from the grave. And that's a sticky point. So here's one possible explanation from someone that I found online as to how the tomb could have been empty after Jesus. And here's what this person said. Clues in the Gospels, evidence from Jewish historian Josephus, belief in the transmigration of souls, and well-documented examples of erroneous declarations of death combined to support a natural explanation for the Easter story. You followed that completely, right? Good. Okay. Wonderful. We're going to get to more of the basics here. So number one, Jesus survived the cross. This is the premise. And he was discovered to be barely alive by the few followers who retrieved him. Fearful because they have illegally retrieved a condemned man, they carry out a decoy burial in a tomb. Jesus then dies soon after and is buried quietly in an anonymous grave. But rumor of his survival reaches his followers as well as the Romans, who open the tomb and find it empty except for burial linen used in the decoy. To soothe their grief, the disciples seize on the rumor of Jesus' survival and encourage each other to hear the voice and see the image of the Master in others. Although, and this is the conclusion, the probability of the scenario proposed herein is low, it is surely far larger than the supernatural one. So, this person lays out this difficult to believe, highly unlikely story, and gets to the end and recognizes that this is a difficult to believe, highly unlikely story. The chances of this happening are close to none, but it's still more believable than Jesus being resurrected. That's an explanation. It thoroughly explains an alternative story in measured step-by-step points. But the person who wrote this, they started out with their own presumption in telling this story. And the presumption is that Jesus could not be raised from the dead, that it's impossible, that it is unbelievable. Therefore, the miraculous option is taken off of the table. In fact, in the author's eyes, again, this scenario that is so strung out makes more sense than something miraculous having happened. Now, there's no proof of any of these things that this guy says happening. There's no proof that those things happened at all. And so the irony, a little bit to me, is that to propose an idea like this to explain the resurrection, you actually have to have a lot of faith. You know? You have to believe so strongly in something that you work hard to make it something that you can chew and swallow. It's more bite-sized this way, you see. Even though it's weird and the story is fantastic, it's something that we can digest. So in the face of that, I stand before you today and confess that I believe something that is unbelievable. I believe in the resurrection of Jesus, and I'm not embarrassed to say it. No matter what might be thrown at me, I'm not embarrassed to say it. And as Christians, we might scoff at those who don't believe in the resurrection, but let me suggest that when someone says that the resurrection of Jesus is impossible, we should agree with them. When they say it is unbelievable, we should say, it sure is. Let me tell you why. The unbelievable nature of the resurrection is a huge part of what gives the resurrection its power. How many of you have seen someone raised from the dead after they're good and dead? I'm not talking like paddles, clear, psh, I'm not talking about that. How many of you have seen someone raised from the dead? Anyone? Why? Because it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. The resurrection of the dead is not a feat that any person can perform, which is why it's unbelievable. It goes against nature and life and all that we know. But the fact that it is unbelievable is crucial to our understanding of the power of the resurrection, because God in Jesus is not doing any old thing, you see. He is changing the world. He is changing life through the resurrection of Jesus. The only explanation for the resurrection is that a being of ultimate power and authority had to have acted. It is a singularly powerful moment between God, His Son, and us. It is unbelievable. It is the unbelievable nature of the resurrection that gives us the hope that we have in it. Because again, God didn't do something ordinary in raising Jesus from the dead. People are right to think that this can't happen. But what it says is that our God is capable of doing the impossible. And in fact, He does not have to conform to the rules that we must observe. God is bigger than that. He is bigger than the ultimate rule of life and death. And why does God break that rule in the person of Jesus? He did it because unbelievably, He loves us. He loves us. And God cares about what happens to us. And therefore, God would not let sin and death have the last word. He defeated it in the resurrection and did something that no person could do. Therefore, the God that I cling to in the resurrection, I need that God to be able to defy the laws of nature. Look, I don't need a God that is restricted in what he can do. Because what happens? What happens if God can only work in the realm of what we think is possible? A God that can only do the possible is no God at all. And you can have that God. I'll take this one. In 1 Corinthians, the author Paul wrote what the end will look like. And so let's close with these words and thoughts. From 1 Corinthians 15, 51 through 57. Listen, I tell you a mystery. We will not all sleep, but we will all be changed. In a flash, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, the dead will be raised imperishable, and we will be changed. For the perishable must clothe itself with the imperishable, and the mortal with immortality. When the perishable has been clothed with the imperishable, and the mortal with immortality, then the saying that is written will come true. Death has been swallowed up in victory. Where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting? The sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God, he gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. When Paul wrote these words, he knew that the resurrection of Jesus is in fact unbelievable. But these words, friends, are words of defiance. These are fighting words that Paul lays out in front of us to describe God's power over these things that control us. But they do not, friends, control him. They do not control him. These words say that there is nothing that can keep God from doing what he sees fit. And they proclaim that God is victorious. That God is victorious. And that he has changed the way everything works, so that we might have life with him. God has done this. God has overcome. God has done the unbelievable, the unthinkable, the impossible. God has done that for you. He's done that for you. And so therefore, today, we acknowledge that we live every day in the great power of the unbelievable resurrection of Jesus. And we, with the witnesses at the tomb, say, he is not here. Why are you looking for the living amongst the dead? He is risen. Amen.